And a very warm welcome and good evening to everyone. I hope you're doing well. I certainly am. There's actually sun in Swansea for once. Goodness. But, nevertheless, that's not what we're looking at today. Today we're looking at, well, viruses. Computer viruses. And I thought we'd have a little go at modelling some viral spread. And maybe if we finish in time, I might actually show you a virus in action. Although I'm not going to show you the code. I don't want anyone making any viruses. Anyway. I should actually mention that next week I won't be able to do a Thursday stream, but I should be able to the week after. So, no stream on the 15th of October. At least, I think that's the Thursday. I think that's the Thursday. My dates might be wrong, but oh well. In any case, what you want to do to start today is head over to arcade.makecode.com. I thought we'd do our little bit of simulation in this because I'm actually going to use features that I showed off last week. Last week we did a lot to do with sprite lists, and this week, well, it's a good opportunity to use them again, so it's nice to get some good practice in. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and make a new project, and I'm going to call this, I don't know, virus, or whatever you like. Virus simulator. There we are. Okay, so we're going to be modelling a very old type of virus. It's called an email worm. An email worm spreads by email. Funnily enough. And it spreads as an attachment or inside email text, and you download it and it affects your computer. And then it sends emails from your computer to another computer. And in fact, you can destroy entire networks like that. And the most famous bug was the I love you bug. In fact, it's actually got an example on Wikipedia, and it is one of the most devastating viruses ever around. This was in the year 2000, I believe. Yeah, 2000. And it would send an attachment that says love letter for you.txt. And people think it's a txt, but it's not. We're going to basically simulate this in MakeCode. So the first thing we're going to need is something to represent the computers in a network. And because we're doing this with sprite lists, it's easier if we make an image first for the sprite rather than make a new sprite. So if I go to variables, I can make a variable. And I'm going to call this the... we'll need a computer image for the uninfected computers and a computer image for the infected computer. So let's do uninfected. Uninfected PC. I've made a variable, and in this I'm going to store the image for uninfected PC. So set uninfected PC to, and now if we go to the Advanced tab on the left and find Images and scroll down to the Create section, I can find a blank image. And if I click in here, I can draw a nice little picture of an uninfected PC. Luckily, there is one in the gallery, so it allows me to be lazy. Now we've got a very nice old looking PC here. So this is going to be our representation of an uninfected PC. Okay. We'll now need a representation of an infected PC. So I'm going to go to variables again, make a new variable, and as you can imagine, this one's just going to be infected PC. And we can set infected PC to, and I can go to, actually, I can actually duplicate this one. If I right click on this little grey blob, I can duplicate, and there we are. And just to change it up a little to make sure we know that this one's infected, I'm going to edit it, and I'm going to give it a red screen of death. Just so, because if I were to use blue, it might not stand out as much. You know, it's always the typical one is a blue screen of death, but no, we're going red screen of death for this one. It's a bad virus. So we've got an uninfected PC and an infected PC. Now, these are going to be sending emails between each other. So we're going to need some kind of infected or uninfected email. So we're going to do exactly the same as we did with the PCs, but we're going to make an email icon. So let's go to variables, let's make a infected mail. And we're going to set infected mail. And I'm going to go to the images tab, find a image blob, and here we can draw a nice little bit of infected mail. Actually, I should probably started with the uninfected because that's the normal. So I've just made my life more difficult for myself here, but oh well. I'm going classic. I'm going for an envelope. Okay, so yeah, I've managed to confuse myself around here. This is going to be the infected envelope, so I'm going to change this up, but what I've got here is currently what I was thinking for the uninfected. So in fact, I'm going to duplicate that across now and then change that. I should have made the uninfected first, but oh well. Let's set the uninfected and let's duplicate that. So yeah, that's what I meant to do. Now I've got uninfected mail, which looks like a plain old boring envelope. And on the infected mail, this is the one I can really mess up. Let's make it green for no particular reason. And let's have some sort of virus sores on it, little bubbles. Just make it obvious that, you know, this is infected and you don't really want to touch it. Yeah, that's obvious enough. Okay. So we've got infected email, uninfected email, infected PC, uninfected PC. We'll also need to store a variable that tells us whether or not the email has been infected. We'll be able to tell whether the PCs are infected by what colour their screen is, but we need a little bit more information to tell whether the mail is infected. So I'm going to make yet another variable, and this one is going to be mail is infected. And I can set mail is infected. Let's start with it being completely free of any viruses. So let's set mail is infected to false, and I can find false in logic, and it's at the bottom. Okay, we are done drawing all of our sprites. We haven't yet made a sprite though. We've drawn the images for them, but we haven't made them. Let's start making them. Let's first of all make a sprite list, one that can store all the sprites we are going to use. And we can find that in the Advanced tab and in Arrays. And at the very bottom of Arrays, there is the Set Sprite List to Array of Sprites of Kind Player. I'm going to drag that in. And Sprite List is a terrible, terrible name, so I'm going to rename that variable. And this is going to be this is going to be all the computers in the network, so why don't I call this the network? So I've got an empty array that I'm going to start filling up with computers to add to the network. And that's exactly what we're going to do, but we're going to do it in a slightly different way. So this is our screen. We want to fit as many computers on this screen as possible. So I'm going to lay them out in a grid. I'm going to have one here, one here, one here, one here, one here, and so on. So about 5 across, 4 down. That gives enough space between them. So how on earth am I going to do that? Well, because we are going to be repeating some code, we're going to use a repeat. We're going to use a loop. Now, if you've been on one of my streams before, you know that I absolutely adore the for index from 0 to 4 block. It's possibly the block I use the most, but we are not going to use that one today. See, index counts for us. Every time this block loops, index goes up by 1, which is fine, but what happens if we want index to go up by 8 or 10 or 300? We can't really control how much index goes up by, so we're going to have to make our own index. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the repeat block, the repeat 4 times, and I'm going to pop it in there. And before I do anything else, I need to create an index of my own. So again, I'm going to head over to variables. I'm going to make a variable. And this variable is going to be called index. And just before I hit the repeat block, I'm going to set the index to 16. So the reason I'm doing this is I want the computers to spread themselves across the screen. So they're going to need different X positions each time. And the first X position I'm going to load up is X16. So that would place, because X is left to right, that would place the first computer along the left-hand side just far enough away from the edge, 16 pixels away from the edge. So I'm starting index at 16, and I've done the maths, and believe me when I say that we can do this 5 times. We're going to fit 5 computers across, and there's going to be a 32 pixel gap between the computers. So if the screen is 160 pixels wide, and you start at position X equals 16, you add 32, and that's the next computer. You add 32, that's the next computer. You add 32, that's the next computer. You add 32, that's the last one. You manage to fit exactly 5, and quite neatly as well. So let's actually do that. Let's start adding the computers in. So, what do I need to do? I need to add them to my network. So let's go to Arrays. And we are going to find where we can add something to the beginning of our network. So list, insert something at beginning. And I'm going to use the stacking block here, not the returning block. So the squared off one, not the round one. List, insert something at beginning. And, well, list doesn't exist, so we need to change that to our network. So drop down menu, network. And what are we going to insert at the beginning? Well, we're going to insert a new sprite. That's going to be an uninfected computer. So let's go to sprites. We need to create a new sprite, but this block isn't really useful to us. This block is setting a variable called mySprite. That's useless. But I'm going to steal it anyway. The bit I'm interested in is this sprite blank of kind player. That's the bit I'm going to nick. And now I can get rid of the set. So what we are doing is we're inserting a blank sprite at the beginning of our list of all the computers in the network. Do we want a blank sprite though? Nah, we want a nice looking uninfected computer. And if you look at the top, we've stored an image for an uninfected computer already. So uninfected PC it was called. So let's go to variables. Let's find uninfected PC. Right, goodo. What's our code doing? Well, our code has just created 5 new computers and added them to the network. But it hasn't really changed their position. They're all going to be on top of each other. In fact, we can actually load that. If we look at our thing now, we've now got 1 computer loaded up, but actually that's a stack of 5. We just can't see the ones underneath. So we need to spread them out a little bit better. So to do that, I need to set the position of the last sprite we added to the network. So let's go to let's go to sprites, and let's go to set my sprite position to. Now, we're not going to, my sprite doesn't exist, so I'm actually going to drag that out and delete it because it's useless to us. Instead, we want to get what's the last thing that's been added to the network. What's at the front of the network queue, because look, we added this to the beginning. So if we go into arrays again, if we go to the read section and the list get value at 0, remember that 0 is the start of the list. So anything at position 0 is going to be what we've added at the beginning of the list. So I'm going to list get value at 0. Remember, list doesn't exist, so we're going to change out list for network. And we don't want to set them all at position 0, 0. That's the top left of the screen. That's useless to us. No, instead, we want to... Oh, sorry, I just saw a message in Discord. My messages must be turned off for that. Looking for the array block. Okay, let me zoom out of that to show the code a bit clearer. Okay. You found the array block? Yeah, so remember, I will be posting all of this at the end as well, if need be. Yeah, so to get sprite of kind, to get that, I had to do a little bit of cheating. I had to go to sprites, and I used the very first block that set my sprite to sprite of kind. I took that. I don't want the red part, I only want the blue part. So I'm going to steal the blue part out of it and delete the red part. And that gives me the bit that I want, the sprite of kind. Yeah, anyway, let me just turn those notifications back on. Yeah, sorry about that. Anyway. Okay, so we are going to start putting our computers in position. I don't want to put them in 0, 0 because that's the top left of the screen. That's useless to us. I want to actually put them evenly across. So I'm actually going to set the X position here to index. I'm going to go to variables and find index. And if we take a look at the simulator, actually we haven't incremented index yet, so they're all still stuck up there. So we'll need to move them down a bit. We'll also need to get them moving across. So we don't want, if we want them to move down, we'll need to change our Y value. So let's change Y to, let's put it in a nice place that's just on the screen, just near the top. Let's say Y is 16. Okay, let me put that, yeah, it's in a nicer position. But now we need to get it moving across the screen so it all spreads out nicely. So to do that, I need to keep adding on to index. So if I go to variables, I can change a variable by 1. Of course, my sprite doesn't exist, so we're going to change that out for index, wherever index is. I'm blind. There we are, index. And we're not going to move the computers on by 1 pixel because that won't be enough. We're going to move them on by 32 pixels. So we're going to keep on adding 32 onto the index. So when we load it up in the simulator, it spreads them out nice and cleanly. So that little trick has given you 5 sprites for a tiny amount of code, whereas if you were to do this any other way, that would be quite a lot of code going on. So we got them going across. Now we need them going down as well. I'm going to do it in a bit of a dirty, quick way. We might come back and clean the code up later if there's enough time, but if not, it achieves the same effect, and the only difference is the code gets a bit messy. So we've successfully put things going across the screen. Now we should probably get them going down, but that means we need to get them over on the left again. So we need to reset index to 16. So where it says set index to 16, I'm going to duplicate that, stick it underneath, and we're going to do the exact same thing again. We're going to do this 5 times. We're just going to duplicate the repeat and stick it underneath again. And the only difference we are making is we want to move everything down by another row. So we need to change the Y value. So at the moment we had 16. Let's add 32 onto that, because we're putting them 32 pixels apart. So 16 plus 32 is 48, I think. Yeah. And we're still going to change the index by 32. So when I load up in the simulator again, we've now got 2 rows. So just another look at that. We reset index to 16 and we copy and paste the code, but change it to Y position 48 again this time. So we can fit another 2 rows. And to do that we're going to do exactly the same. We're going to duplicate the resetting index, stick it underneath the last repeat. I'm going to duplicate the repeat. And we're going to move down another 32 pixels. So what's 48 plus 32? Come on, brain. You're embarrassing me. 30, so 70 to 80. 80? 80, yeah. 80. Okay. And we can squeeze in one last row. So I'm going to duplicate set index 16 again. And I can duplicate that again. And the last one, 80 plus 32 is 112. I can do that one. Okay. If I open the simulator, we've got a nice neighborhood of computers all set out in a grid. So that whole block of code is very ugly and inelegant. Might come back to fix that later, but if not, it's only a few bytes. It's not really that much of a problem. Okay, so what are we up to now? We've got a network of computers. We should probably have some emails being sent. So let's create a sprite for email. I'm going to go to near the start of onStart, and we're going to go to sprites. I'm going to set my sprite, and yeah, might as well put it at the top. It doesn't really make a difference at the moment. So set my sprite to sprite of kind player. My sprite is a terrible name, so I'm going to rename that variable, and I'm going to call this my mail, because this is my email. And we're not going to have it as kind player because we've set the computers to be players. So we're going to set it to be something else just to make it a little bit clearer for the game engine to understand. We're going to just set it to a projectile. It's not a projectile. It's all these in this list here are just names. They don't really mean anything. You know, food, enemy, projectile. We'll just set this projectile as long as it's different to whatever the computers are. Actually, I've noticed something. Yeah, if I delete that for the moment, we already set a mail image. So if I have that back a second, I was about to have this to be the uninfected mail image, but if we look, uninfected mail is not set until after this is set. So that's going to cause problems. That's going to cause an issue. How can I be set to something that hasn't been set yet? It would cause a variable not found error or variable not set yet. So my mistake, I'm going to delete that actually, and I need to stick it this time underneath where I've defined the uninfected male image. So to do that again, let's go to sprites. I'm going to set my sprite to kind. I'm going to make sure it's underneath where I've already established the image that I'm going to use. And my sprite's terrible, so I'm going to call that male. And we don't want it to be of kind player. I want it to be a projectile. And we've already got this image now, so now we can reuse it. If I go to variables and find my uninfected male variable, that stores the image that I want. Okay, so if I load it up, we can see it's made an envelope in the middle of the screen for us. So, what are we going to do next? Well, the next thing to do is get that mail going somewhere. It needs to be sent to a computer. And to do that, we are going to create a function. And I'm going to call this function at the bottom of onStart. So I'm just going to the bottom of onStart on ready. We're going to go to functions, make a function, and this is just going to be a simple little send mail. Oh, where am I now? Oh yeah, I'm there. So the send mail function is going to pick a random computer to go to, and then it's going to tell the mail to head there. So we need a target. We need to set the target. Let's make a variable, and I'm going to call this the target. And we can set the target. Well, we need to pick a computer out of all of the computers in the network. So we'll need to get a random computer out of the network somehow. So if we go to arrays and we scroll down and find... we've used this one before. List get value at 0. So if you remember, 0 was the start of the array. Let's say we want to get a random place in the array. Let's do that. So set target to, well, we don't want the first one in the array, and list doesn't exist, so we need to change that to network. We want to get a random value, and random is stored in the math tab. It's near the bottom. Pick random from 0 to 10. Okay, so this bit of code's fine, but it could easily break. And it could break if we have too many or too few computers in our network. So this is going to pick from 0 to 10. How many computers have we got? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 by 4. We've got 20 computers. So at the moment, that's only picking between the first 10. Okay, that's useless to us. What happens if we would set that to 20? Okay, that's fine. It'll pick between 0 and 20. But there's another issue. What happens if you decide to add more computers into the array? Someone over on Discord has done that with 36 computers. Nice screenshot. So how can we make that better? Well, we need to get the length of the network list. So we can do that in arrays. And we can get the length of the array. And list doesn't exist, so let's change that to network. And before I go ahead and plug that in, there's another little thing we need to do to that. And it comes with this problem. In computer science, we always start counting from 0. So there might be 20 items in the list, but the very last one is actually going to have number 19 as its position. Because 0 is the beginning, 19 is the end. So there's 20 items, but the highest number is 19. So we actually need to go ahead and -1 from this length. Because the length is 20, if I try and look for position 20, that would actually be the 21st item, which doesn't exist, which will throw an error. So I'm going to do the length of the array network -1. So math, and going to get the minus block. And I'm going to minus from it 1. And I'm going to put this whole assembly into the second part of the pick random. So, with that little bit of code, no matter how many computers we have in our network, it will never pick one that doesn't exist. It'll never throw an error, which is a very important skill when designing, when programming. So we are setting the target to a random computer from the network. Now we need the mail to go there. So if I go to Sprite and scroll on down to not very far, actually scrolling to the physics tab, we can set a sprite to follow another sprite. We used this a lot in my last stream, and we're going to use the same here today because this is a nice little shortcut. So set my enemy follow my sprite. And I'm going to stick it under there. And we don't, these are throwing nasty errors because neither of these variables exist. So I'm going to change my enemy to be the male because that's what we want to go somewhere. And we can set my sprite. Well, my sprite doesn't exist, but what does exist is the target we want it to go to. So I'm actually going to click the drop down arrow and I'm going to change this to target. Okay, so let's open the simulator and let's watch. As soon as I click play, nothing will happen because I've forgotten something. I said before we started working on the function that we needed to call the function at the bottom of the onStart. So here's the onStart at the very bottom. Let's call the sendMail function. So let's go to functions. We can call sendMail. So it'll send the mail, it'll run this function, and the mail will go to a random target. Okay, I don't know whether you saw that. Let me refresh it. Okay, every time I refresh it, it goes to a random computer in the network and stops there. Which is exactly what we want. Now, before we handle what happens when it reaches a computer and needs to head on somewhere else, let's quickly make something a little bit tidier about this. You'll notice that when I was running this, the mail is underneath the computers. That's not very useful to us. We need to see this on top. So I'm going to go to the near the top of my onStart function. Oh, I've made a mistake. And after we have created the mail the male sprite, we can actually set the depth of the male so we can say what layer it appears on. Okay, top area. It might be, to the Discord, it might be an issue where I put this set male to sprite at the top of on start, whereas actually needs to be underneath where we set uninfected male. I hope that helps. Right, so we have set the male to a sprite. Let's set the depth of that. Let's go sprites. And we can set a property of a sprite. So my sprite X, that's the closest thing to what we want. We can change things around with the drop down menu. I'm going to set. I'm going to put it directly underneath where I created the male sprite. I'm going to set male. And I'm not going to set its X position. I'm going to use that drop down menu and I'm going to actually set its Z position. So we've used MakeCode Arcade a lot. And well, we've used X and Y a lot, but we've never used Z before. Z is basically what layer things appear on. I'm just going to dip down to the bottom to show off my mail sending code. Just for anyone who needs it, but we created a function called send mail. We set a variable called target, and we set it to get a random position from the network list, and it picks randomly from 0 to the length of the array, network -1. And then we set mail to follow the sprite. Again, I'll make all code available at the end on the TechnoCamp's website. Okay. So let's... Sorry, I can't really join a voice channel at the moment because my computer prevents me from doing that. I'm sadly on Mac. I might pop in after I finish the stream if you need a hand. Okay, so we have got the mail moving around. We should probably handle when the mail collides with another object, when it collides with a computer. So let's go to sprites, and in the overlaps section on sprites, we get this on sprite of kind player overlaps other sprite of kind player. And this is where it's important to make sure that we set our players and projectiles correctly. If we say sprite of kind projectile, so the only projectile we've got is the male. If the sprite of kind projectile overlaps a player, that's exactly what we want. What should we do? Well, we should probably say if this is the target, then choose another target. But if it's not the target, then, well, we need to deal with that. So we're going to need an if statement. That's the first thing. When it hits a computer, we're going to ask, is this the computer that you meant to hit? And if it is, then we can stop the mail from moving, get it to go somewhere else. If it isn't, well, then we need to ignore it and carry on moving. So we're going to have to ask, is this other sprite, the one that we are hitting, equal to the target. So we're going to have to go to logic, and we're going to get a comparison, the equals comparison. We're going to say, is the other sprite, which I can grab from the top of this function. I'm not going to ask if it's equal to 0 because that will cause issues. So we're going to instead ask, is this equal to the target? I'm going to wait for that error to go, and it's gone. Yeah, so if the sprite that we hit is our target, then we should probably stop. Pause for a moment. Let's do that. Let's go to loops, and we can pause. And it's going to wait for a little bit on that computer, and then maybe we want to go somewhere else. How do we get our mail to move? Well, if we go to functions, we can send mail again. Okay, so if we hit the target, pause for a bit, then send the mail. Let's have a look. Okay, so our mail hits the target, pauses, goes somewhere else, pauses, goes somewhere else, pauses, goes somewhere else, and so on and so on and so on. And this is a nice representation of emails being sent around a network. So maybe a school network, maybe a business network, maybe the whole World Wide Web. Because that's just a big network. Well, the internet in general. And it's just heading over or wherever it likes to go, hits a target, says, let's go somewhere else. Okay. That's all well and good, but we've got a healthy network. That's no fun. Let's add a little bit of chaos into the mix. Let's say someone's computer is infected. Let's make that happen first of all. So, I'm going to go down to the bottom of the onStart function. And the last thing we do before beginning the game is we're going to pick one random computer to be infected. So, we need to change the image of a computer. So to change the image of a sprite, we go to Sprites. And at the very bottom of the Sprites menu, we can set my sprite image to. Now, we don't want my sprite. Let's get that out of here. Go away. And we don't want a blank image. Let's get that out of here. Will it not go? No, it won't go. We'll have to replace that. Oh well. Okay, so we need to get a random number, a random sprite out of the network. How did we do that before? Remember, we set the target to a random computer from the network. Now we need to set the image of a random computer from the network. So actually, this whole network get value at, which was in our send mail function, I can actually copy and paste. I can just duplicate that. Where's it gone? There's it gone. Because remember, this code gets us a random computer from the network. So set the random computer from the network, set the image of that computer to, well, we could redraw an image by clicking on that, but why go to the bother when we made a variable that stores that for us? It's in variables. And it is, I think we called it infected PC. So at the end of onStart, we're going to set a random computer to be infected. It's going to have the infected PC look. Okay, see the infected PC is down in the bottom right hand corner. Let's load it up again. Now it's this one. So again, now it's this one. Now it's this one. Now it's this one. And just show that code off one more time. We are setting. I use this big block of code that I copied from the send mail function. We're going to set its image to be infected. So now we should probably say what happens if the mail hits an infected PC. So if you remember, we created this function. This on sprite of kind projectile overlaps other sprite of kind player. This is the collision that happens when we hit the what's the word? When we hit a PC of any kind. We need to add a little bit of code that checks whether that PC is infected or not. So I use the magic word if. That means we're going to need an if statement. And I'm going to put this inside the if that we've already got. But I'm going to try and make sure it's above the pause, not around the pause. So at the moment, when I do that, it wants to go around. Oh, it's not showing it now. There you are. It wanted to go around the pause and the call send mail. I want this to go above. So it should look exactly like that. You have the if finishes, then the pause, then the send mail. You want to make sure that these two blocks are outside this inside if, this internal if. This if is going to handle what happens if the computer is infected. How do we tell if a computer is infected? Well, it's going to have the infected sprite. So we're going to use a block that we've never used before in these streams. We're going to compare two images. So if you go to images, which is near advanced, scroll down to the bottom, we've got this compare block here, and it compares whether a picture is equal to another picture. And that's exactly what we want. I'm going to plonk it in that if statement. And what are we checking? Well, pictures doesn't exist, that's why it's thrown an error. We want to check whether the sprite that we hit, this other sprite, we want to see if that image is equal to the image for an infected PC. So let's find the other sprite's image first. If we go to the Sprites tab, let's scroll to the bottom. In the image section, we've got the option to get the image of a sprite. That's exactly what we want. Get out of here, picture. You don't exist, and I don't care about you. So at the moment is getting the image of my sprite, and my sprite doesn't exist. So let's get rid of my sprite as well. To the abyss with you. We want to get the image instead of the other sprite. So I'm going to steal other sprite from the top of this function. And now we can say if the image of the thing that we collide with is equal to the image for the infected PC. We need to stick in there, oh, not that. In this grey bit, we need to stick the image of the infected PC. I can get that from variables, where we actually stored it as a variable called infected PC. So this is a very long-winded and awkward way of asking, is the PC that I hit infected? If it is infected, what should we do? Well, we should probably update a variable to say that the mail is infected. Remember that way back at the start we made a variable called mail is infected. So I'm going to set mail is infected. This needs to be set to true. So where's true? It's in logic. And down here, true. Mail is infected. Set that to true. Now, we know in the code that the mail is infected, but we should probably also make it look infected. We should make it actually appear that something's gone wrong with the email. So we should update the image of the mail. Let's go to sprites. Let's scroll down to the bottom of sprites, and we can find the set my sprite image to. Now, we don't want to set my sprite because that doesn't exist. We want to set mail. We want to set its image to. Now, way back at the start, again, you'll remember that we made a variable that stores the infected image. So variables. Remember, we made this infected mail variable, and that stores a very sickly looking bit of email. And there we are. So this if statement, we've not finished it, but we finished most of it. It's going to set mail to be infected if it touches an infected PC. Let's have a look and see if we can get that to happen. And it happens straight away. I don't know whether you caught that, but the mail is now green and infected. Let's try again. Let's see if it hits the infected PC at any time. Because it's random, we never know. This could be years. Okay, it went over the top of it, but it wasn't its target, so it didn't get set then. Come on, haven't got all day. No? Oh. No, nearly. Come on. Go for it. Go on. No. Yes. No. Okay, I'm fed up of waiting. Just believe me that it works. When it hits that infected PC, it will turn the mail infected. But that's not very useful because currently, with the code that we've got, the infected mail doesn't actually do anything. It just, if it were infected and it hits another computer, nothing's going to happen. So we need to actually say what happens if the mail is infected, what does it do to the computer, not what does the computer do to the mail. So in this if statement that we just made, I'm going to click the plus to get an else, and I'm going to click the plus again to get an else if. And the only reason I'm doing that is so I can get rid of this else. Because, well, you could do this with an else. I want to keep it as an else if, because as a little extension you can add antivirus in. But we're not going to do that just yet. In fact, I want to show off the virus later, so might not have time to do that anyway. But this else if is going to say, if the mail is infected, we should set the PC to have the infected sprite, the infected image. So I'm going to need logic and a comparison. So equals comparison. And I'm going to get a variable. And that variable, remember we set is mail is infected. So if mail is infected equals, well, that's throwing an error because we never said it could be equal to 0. We need to say if it's equal to true. So let's go to logic. Let's grab a true. Will that error go away? I hope it will. There we are. So if the mail is infected, then what should we do? Well, we should set the sprite that we hit, the other sprite, we should set its image to be that of an infected PC. Let's go sprites and scroll down to the bottom and set my sprite image. And we don't want my sprite, we want other sprite. So I'm going to scroll to the top of the function and I'm going to grab other sprite from here. And delete the... Oh, come on. Get out of here, my sprite. I hate you. Okay. Now, we don't want to set it to blank because blank's not useful to us. We want to set it to be the image of the infected PC. And we stored that image in a variable called infected PC. Okay, that's everything we should need. Let's see it. And if it hits that infected computer, the mail will come infected and it will infect every other computer that it hits. There we are, the mail's now infected and now it's going on its way infecting other computers on the network. And that is a lovely demonstration of what happens if you get an email worm. It hits your computer gets infected, your computer sends out email to everyone in your contacts, and it sends them a copy of the virus. It's quite insidious. Also quite cool. Anyway, that's it for the code portion. If you ever want to take a look at what I've written, you can always go to technocamps.com, navigate to activity packs, scroll down, and we are on season 2, or series 2, which is the British way of saying it, series 2 of Virtual Code Clubs, and you'll find it posted somewhere around about here. But in the meantime, let's get on to the fun little extra. I know it's beyond 5:30, but who said we have to stick to that anymore? I wanted to show you a fun example of a virus in action. Now, I wasn't going to affect my own computer because that would be silly. Instead, I'm going to affect a Windows XP computer because Windows XP is my favourite. Also, because old computers aren't as safe as modern computers. You don't really hear about viruses nowadays because everything's got antivirus built in. Macs have Mac Security Center, Windows has Windows Defender, and you've got all the other varieties of antivirus, some of them even free. So viruses are still around, it's just they're not as well known. However, Windows XP is pretty vulnerable. It's got a lot of security flaws in it. And one of them is it has a security flaw where if you get a dodgy email, so here's a dodgy email I've got. I found this amazing recipe for chocolate brownies without chocolate or flour that could be made in 4 minutes. Check out the recipe I've attached. Oh, and look, there's an attachment. Now, Windows XP, thankfully, has fixed this, but even older versions of Windows, like Windows 95, Windows 98, and Windows 2000, they used to hide file extensions. So, how you'd normally get a file extension, background.jpg, profile picture.png, text file would be readme.txt. It never used to put what came after the dot afterwards. But after so many issues came with sending email attachments that had viruses in them that actually hid the file extension, they enabled it. So let's have a look at this one. This one's called hello.txt.vbs. Now, on older versions of Windows, you wouldn't see the .vbs because that's the file extension. All you see is hello.txt. So let's save that. Let's save it to disk. Let's save it to my desktop. And look, it thinks it's hello.txt. Okay, I can close Outlook now. And I don't know whether you can make it out, but on there I've got a file that says hello.txt. And to anyone, that would look like a normal text file. So let's open it. Ooh, you are hacked. Okay, I can't get rid of this now. I keep pressing OK, OK, OK. It's adding files to my desktop. Ah, okay. It's gone away. What are all these files doing? Let's open one. And it's opened up Internet Explorer with a web page that says you are hacked. So it's not a very dangerous virus. I know because I wrote it myself, just as a demonstration. I didn't want to put anything really dodgy on there. But it has the potential to be a lot worse. This was my desktop. If I'd opened it up in a Windows folder or in my computer, it could have started overwriting files in there. And if you overwrite some files like System32, you can actually wipe your entire computer and make it useless. So that's fun. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed a little simulation of some viruses. And as a little bit of an outro, if I can get it up. Where's it gone? Thought I might as well just play a screensaver. Let's go for my favourite 3D props. Oh, it's frozen. Oh, that's annoying. I was going to have a nice little outro where the pipes would show on screen, but actually, yeah, it's completely locked up. Oh well. In any case, goodbye.